A really interesting topic. I mean, coming in the wake of these two speakers, I'm trying to think, how do I connect with this? What is the theme that's emerging in the midst of this? And I'm not totally sure yet, because in some ways we've been listening to people describing the transcendent, right? Describing the ideal of what we are after, about how we can come together in a oneness. And what I study is actually the exact opposite of that. I study the process by which people begin to feel fractured from one another in such a way that they can get to the place where they feel that the only solution to their problem is the elimination of a particular group or people. And that in that moment where that feels like the most sensible solution to the problem is a part of our human experience that is not studied often. And we have found ourselves in a moment on this planet where we are chanting the words "never again" over and over again, but nothing seems to be coming of this mantra, that we seem to say that if we just repeat it over again, it will cease to happen. And this, and of course, much of what I study has built off the platform of the Shoah in and the Holocaust, that is sort of was a pivot point in European history, a kind of a reckoning of European history. And as you can see and probably hear, I am a product of that colonial endeavor. I have been enculturated to be a colonizer. I grew up in America. I'm male, I'm cisgendered, heterosexual. I am all of those things that told me that the right thing for me to do was to colonize. The right thing for me to do was make other people like me. It was never that, because I knew no one could ever be like me, right? That's part of the whiteness of that. You tell people they should aspire to be like you, but you can never let them be like you. And so that dynamic of what I study, and I was rooted in Christianity. I grew up, I went to seminary, I was going to be a minister, and I started getting interested in the history of Christianity, trying to get to the roots of what Christianity actually was, especially in its relationship to Judaism. I had always had an interest in the Holocaust. I would not be proud to say, it's kind of a sick fascination with it when I was a young man. But that curiosity led me into a journey to try and understand where this modern form of atrocity called genocide actually comes from. And so my classes and the teaching and my scholarship changed from dealing with the second century and dealing with anti-Jewish writings and the Christian writings of the second century to now, for the last 10 plus years, teaching courses on genocide and trying to understand this phenomenon, not only from a religious point of view, but also from a humanist point of view. One of my assumptions that I make in my course is that nothing that a human being can do could ever be considered inhuman. So if we assume that every action that a human being does must be by nature of its action human, then we have to figure out ways of how we can incorporate things like genocide into our understanding of what it means to be human. And for the most part, I don't think we have really done that. We have created a class of people who perpetrate genocide as monsters, and we have decided to treat them as monsters. The irony is, of course, is that people who perpetrate genocide actually see their targets as a kind of monstrous form of people which they can treat any way they want. We actually do this to the people who commit genocide and decide to treat them in different ways, because we don't want to include them in the continuum of what we think is human, because I think we're scared to confront that. As a species, we are, and it's difficult for us. So I have spent a lot of my latter part of my second chapter of my career studying genocide and what that could possibly be. What I want to share with you today is not the whole course that I do, but it's something that I've been working on in the last several years that is in its infancy. It's an idea of trying to understand genocide in a different way than the way that we have thought about it since 1948, since the creation of the term genocide, and the whole concept of what genocide is we have been, I think, locked into a very narrow and restrictive understanding of what genocide is, and that has allowed us to miss some of the other early warning signs of where genocide actually comes from. Because we think of it as a monstrous eruption of human evil, we have become blind to looking at what genocide actually is in its lesser forms. Because we have been focused on the destruction of people in whole or in part, because of our association of genocide with the Holocaust, we think of only as genocide as a way of mass slaughter or mass killing. But genocide is so much different than that. And genocide really has to do with an intention, not just an intention to kill or eliminate, but it's an intention to, what I'm coming to the term that I keep coming back to, is the intention to disappear people. And this can take many, many forms. And this is the idea that I've been working on. Actually, I think I will, I know I said I might not share the screen, but I think I will share this screen that you can see. This is just a slide from what I've been working on. And I'm working with this idea of a new definition of genocide based not on killing or the kind of most extreme form of genocide, but on the lesser forms of genocide, as genocide as a phenomenon of disappearance. I didn't make up this term. I got this from my study of what happened in the 1980s in Guatemala. And in Guatemala, they used the term that people were disappeared, that they just literally disappeared. Now, what we found out in Guatemala is that there were mass graves, and that the regimes that the United States government put in charge of Guatemala went and systematically eliminated or disappeared entire Mayan communities and buried them in mass graves. And so when they say they were disappeared, that is quite literally what happened to them. But I think that there's more, this concept is a very interesting one for me as a scholar when I'm trying to explain this to my American, white, privileged American students who have grown up with this idea that this can only happen in foreign lands, that genocide is only something that happened in the past, that it's something that happened in Europe at worst, and that we as Americans would never be able to see that within our own story. And so the idea of disappearance is what I'm working with here. The slide that I'm showing now I realize it's a kind of a busy PowerPoint slide, and I'm always very nervous about PowerPoint slides with lots of words on it. I get it, it's confusing, and I don't like it either. But I wanted to show it to you because this idea of the intentional disappearance of a targeted group can manifest itself in many, many ways. And this has come really from looking and walking with the world since 2011, really when I started doing genocide studies like full on, and seeing how genocides keep rearing their heads and trying to study what are the characteristics that all of these things share. And they share the intention to disappear people. So I've broken it down into 5 degrees of intensity. And the first one is probably the most familiar. That's the degree of physical destruction of members of a targeted group. That would involve mass killings. That is very familiar to us. That's like the Holocaust, or that's like what happened to Armenians in Turkey at the beginning of the tail end of the First World War. And that is a very recognizable thing. That happened in Rwanda. That's what I study most, is Rwanda. And that one is obvious, right? But then you get down into different and varying degrees of intentions to disappear. So the second degree is the geographical disappearance of a targeted group. This might look like what we know as ethnic cleansing. This is my least favorite word in genocide study because it has to do with cleansing. And to use the word cleansing in any kind of framework other than something that is a good thing, it seems an affront to me, but that's the term. That's why I put it in quotes. Ethnic cleansing seems a very problematic term indeed. But it can also include forced detention of people. It can also include mass incarceration, a targeted mass incarceration of a particular target group to disappear them. This can look like redlining in the United States of America, where you have the government sanctioning the sale of properties to Black Americans to keep them contained in particular neighborhoods. This can disappear them from the view of white people. Mass incarceration can disappear people from white views and white neighborhoods. And that intention to disappear is what is interesting to me. There's also a third degree, which are actions intended to halt or impede the birth of children. One of the characteristics of the UN definition is it is focused on children, which is the transmission of culture. It is the transmission of the human species. And so there's a lot of care to that. The third degree of actions can be actions intended to impede or halt the birth of children. This can look like a forced and organized structural rape, such as happened in Bosnia, Herzegovina, Rwanda, almost all wars, and certainly all genocides. There was structured, targeted rape of women. Forced sterilization can also look like an intention to impede births. That happened in this country, in America, through the eugenics movement. And it can also be withholding of health services with the intention of slowing down the birth rate of particular groups. The fourth degree can be the destruction of a group's culture by force. It can be legal or otherwise. It doesn't matter whether it's legal or not. Whether or not a country determines that this is legal doesn't make any difference in my definition. This can be forced marriages. This can look like forced adoptions. This can look like forced conversion, political indoctrination that is non-consensual, that is against one's agency. This can look like language replacement. This can look like the criminalization of religious expression, because that religious expression has to do with that culture. And so any measures taken to remove those or suppress them or disappear them can fit into this definition of a forced disappearance of a people. And then you can have the fifth degree of disappearance, which is cultural conditioning leading to a group's eventual disappearance from society. So these are more long-term agendas that certain countries can have intentions to disappear peoples. It can look like segregation, which is designed to disappear people from mainstream society. It can look like apartheid, which is designed to disappear people from the larger, more dominant structure. And it can look like Carlisle schools. That's a phenomenon that we had in this country, where that would be the forced indoctrination of indigenous peoples to take away their language, take away their culture, and turn them into Americans against their will, right? So the kicker at the end of this is that genocide, and whatever these degrees are, and these are in flux, I'm just trying to sort things out a little bit at this point, can only be attributed, and this is important, to a dominant group who has an imbalance of political and social power. And social power is measured by the ability of a group to change the lives of others without their consent. So this is what we have in this country, and in South Africa too. We have these competing narratives about that there's a white genocide. And you often hear in America from white supremacist groups that it's actually white people who are being targeted as a focused genocide to eliminate white culture. But by my definition, that cannot be counted as genocide, because white culture and white people in America still have the power to impede or change a group without their consent. But Black Americans, Latinx, whatever group, Jews that white supremacists want to say, they do not have that power. They may imagine they have that power, but they do not actually have that power. So power is a huge part of what I talk about the way that power is used against people who are seen as obstacles. And religion in particular comes into this, because I also study the way that power can influence religion, and how those political expediencies of empire and conquest and conversion can be interpreted, can end up looking and being genocidal.